I'm April Morgenroth. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Health Sciences here at Seattle Pacific University, and I teach adult health assessment, medical surgical nursing, and advanced clinical pathophysiology. Case studies are kind of like the proverbial story problem in math, or like you would think of in high school algebra, but they're very useful in talking about the human context of health and disease. I've always really enjoyed using case studies in nursing just because it follows kind of the nursing model of holistic care and considering the disease process within the context of an entire person. So it makes sense to teach it within that context. But I really started using them heavily when I taught an advanced clinical pathophysiology course over the summer, which is kind of a condensed quarter, and nursing classes tend to be pretty topic and content heavy. So I found it was a really great way to kind of create a forum to start putting together some of those pieces of nursing knowledge that we talk about into a context in which the students are going to see the disease and also practice within. And it worked really well in class. It was 3 hours long, so they didn't want to hear me lecture for 3 hours. So it was a great activity to put the pieces together, to give them a break from listening to me talking, and also really engage in the material on a whole different level. Probably the best and most successful example was in a graduate class for advanced clinical pathophysiology, and we actually made the whole class case-based, and I flipped that classroom and did most of the lecture outside of class. But then every week the students were assigned to do a case study. All of the students in the class did the same case study, and instead of approaching the case study and talking about specific questions related to that individual patient within the case study, they actually approached it in a framework where they had 7 kind of topics that they had to address within the context of that patient. So every student did the same case study, and when we came together in class, a group or a pair of students, however big your class is, would be kind of responsible for directing and presenting the case study of that week to their peers. So they will have also done the same case study, but at a much deeper level. And with current research about what's going on with that disease process now. So they would lead the case study, and then in the discussion that they would lead, that's when the individual questions about the patient would come out. So we'd actually get a much richer conversation since they'd all prepared before. And they would participate and teach one another. So it was kind of a win-win. They hear less of my voice talking at them, and they learn a lot from each other, which I think also worked really well in the context of reinforcing adult learning theory, which I think for the graduate students was particularly important for this group. We've used case studies in a couple of really unique ways in class. This is in the same pathophysiology class. After the group presentation, we'd still have time to discuss as a class. So once they kind of got the swing of the case study framework that we use to approach the case, which I thought was really important because they're going to use that same framework in their own practice. We did a cold case one day because Seattle Pacific is conveniently a Christian school, we can do this, but we did one about King Jehoram in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, which is an interesting passage. If you're not familiar with it, it talks about a king of Judah and how, because of his evil ways, he had these unfortunate bowel diseases that came upon him, and Elijah was telling him that this was a prophecy over him. So he ended up with this bowel disease, and we used that passage to have the students discuss and talk about what do they think. So their conclusion was they think that King Jehoram had Crohn's disease with a fistula. So it was a great case study for them and a great way for them to engage as a group with a disease process, but also to kind of look at the Bible in a whole new light. I think it makes it a little more real and maybe raw, but it was good. I don't think they're going to forget that, and I don't think I'm going to forget that either. I was really impressed with, first of all, the way they used the framework to approach that problem, and also what they found out was pretty exciting. When I started first using case studies, one of the things that I learned fairly quickly was if you try to put too many case studies in a short period of time, it can be a little overwhelming for the students and they never can really get into it in depth. So I found it's better to maybe focus on one or two really kind of complex cases for the students to kind of put those pieces together rather than have too many in a short period of time. Additionally, one thing I thought worked really well with the kind of the model of the whole class doing the same case was that they were more engaged and were more able to have a really rich discussion about what they found out, to debate things, to bring up points, to pull in current research too. I think that was a great way to do it. Other than a couple of ways I've tried before was assigning different groups different case studies, and then what I found was that group learns a whole lot about diabetes, but they didn't learn quite so much about hypothyroidism, which maybe the other group had. But this way, if they're all doing the same case and then engaging with each other about it, I feel like they got a whole lot more and a more well-rounded experience with each disease process.